Ray, thanks for coming on today to discuss the importance of data platforms in the NHS and the evolution of AI. Would you like to start by telling us a little bit about kind of your past, 15 plus experience within the digital health industry?
Yeah, my background is technical. After I got my degrees, I actually built and designed chips. So I've actually grown the silicon, done all that stuff, and built chips and all the rest of it. That was a long time. That got quite boring. So I then was invited to join IBM. So I had 18, 19 years with IBM, and one of the technically doing the performance tuning on products, etc. And they invited me to set up a consultancy practice in Europe, which was very pleasant and enjoyable because they were concerned that we wanted to make sure that the organizations were getting the best value out of their investments in technology. And out of that came things like business process analysis, business process management, and the way of re-looking at the investments in technology. And that was very, very rewarding. And I then, about 18, 20 years, was invited to live in Bermuda, fly in private jets around the world for 3 times my salary. Well, no, of course I said no. I did. I left that. And it allowed me to pursue some of my more entrepreneurial interests. And I found a very fantastic product in the US, which hadn't been brought into Europe, called Groove Networks. And we brought that and got that up and running. And it was a peer-to-peer type architecture, a product used in deep black ops and all that sort of stuff around the planet. And it was a very exciting tool, which we got going. And eventually, about 2007, it was bought by Microsoft, and they renamed it and called it OneDrive. And so they then got rid of quite a lot of the strengths and features of it because it was a peer-to-peer architecture. Dear old Microsoft is a sort of a client-server architecture. But that's how we've got some of the features and benefits in SharePoint and in OneDrive today from that product. So that was quite interesting. And then I got invited to, so I brought in a number of entrepreneurial tools and built up a couple of businesses. But then I was invited to set up a business with a GP. And we did that. And that was the intention of that, was to start personalizing healthcare for patients. And that's what we did over a number of years. And it was a bit of ahead of its time, which led to that. But that got me involved very heavily in healthcare. And that was probably around about mid-90s or turn of the century. And in the last sort of 15 years or so, I spent a lot of time both sides of the fence, one in terms of population health management, we can talk a little bit about, but program management as much as anything, for implementation of things like creating the shared record, as developing the strategy for ICSs and ICBs as they evolved 2 or 3 years ago. And that allowed me to support that direction of travel, still investing, if you like, on some of the things I'd done with the IBM framework, because that was all very valid method and enterprise architecture type stuff. And that's really where we've got today. But that also, I enjoy getting my hands at the coalface and getting down there and doing some of the grunt work as well when it's appropriate, because there's a lot of skills transfer needed at the moment between fortunate people like mine who have acquired a few things and integrating that into the local organizations. And I think one thing we'll talk about perhaps now, looking to the future with the new 10-year plan that's coming, is very much centered around pet prevention. It's centered around use of digital and digital transformation. And the thing that I think is lacking very heavily at the moment is the skills in the organizations. And that's where I hope people ourselves can help with the adoption of things like AI and the right AI, and how to absorb things like FTP.
Yeah.
So that's very much where it's got me over the past N years, okay, of this point in time.
Yeah.
But is that helpful?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That's actually really interesting to know. And it kind of relates to a lot of things that we are going to be talking about today. We'll dive straight into, obviously, data platforms. Massive things in the NHS. Federated data platform is going to be a new massive, is starting to already be a new massive thing. From your point of view, already being heavily I think, yeah, we're heavily involved in the likes of data platforms. I know that you've worked a lot with Snowflake. What impact do you think it will have, and what are the key benefits for organisations that adapt and will use it effectively?
Well, I think it's very heavily aligned with the 10-year plan. I think what we're trying to do, and I think this is one of the keys to something like an architectural framework for health. We need to be able to have a national direction of travel around all of the data that's going on in England. And what FDP is trying to do is to mandate one framework, one architecture, but not imposing the way it's exploited into the local community.
Yeah.
And one of the key elements of the new strategy is the shift from treatment to prevention. Prevention, you've got to understand very much the population health environment in order to produce and make it more effective for patients, help reduce inequalities, etc. And therefore, if you've got something powerful, as we've now got with FDP, I think it's a very good direction of travel. There's been a huge number of issues and debates about it, of course, because of Palantir's political background as a company and entity and what they get up to. And that debate is going to continue. And it centers around that, and also data security and all the information that NHS is going to have to make sure remains entirely secure within that framework. But ironically, I think that cost about 330 million, that system.
Yeah, right.
And recently, they've just signed another 8.5 million deal with, I think it's KPMG, to help improve the adoption and the take-up of FDP around the country. There are 100 and something trusts have already committed to it, but 45 have got it implemented as of April this year. And there's lots of big benefits coming from that right now. And like everything else, I mean, there's a strong analogy to me with what happened with Teams, because until we had the COVID panic situation, Microsoft and people like that were spending an awful lot of time trying to persuade organizations to migrate to 365 and that type of activity. And then there's a whole debate amongst different trusts about pricing, about the volumes because of the license they got. And it's gone on for 2 or 3 years. And then all of a sudden we hit this panic. And I said, how on earth are we going to be able to run the business if everyone's working from home? So we need a standard system. And they called in Microsoft and they rolled it out. They rolled out Teams. I think it was in about 4 days across the NHS.
Oh, right, okay.
And people came screaming and dragging to the point, but they got on with it, and now it's there. And I think you've seen a lot of like that. There's been a lot of the controversy over FDP, people getting on with it, which they tend to do once the decision has been ultimately made. But and the NHS England mandated, I think, that everybody must get on board with that by the end of 2026. And I think the rate of which that is happening was some of the concerns and why they perhaps awarded that contract to KPMG to improve adoption. But that's a bit of the background. Now, therefore, I think it's right, and it's got some very clear objectives of what it's aiming to do, aligned very much with the new 10-year plan, which is coming out, and aligned with the refocusing of the ICBs to ensure they focus on the things that the 10-year plan is trying to focus on, which is looking at, population health and making sure we address inequalities. So doing all the data analytics of all that stuff is where FDP is being deployed and being used. And there's a number of good examples of that. I'm just looking, I made some brief notes to avoid waffling about this.
That's fine. Well, I was going to say, that's fine. Well, obviously, you can continue to talk. I was just going to mention, obviously, with FDP, it's already something that is used massively across different trusts, and every trust, well, pretty much every trust in the NHS. It's actually now at a point where you've just mentioned it's actually needed to be implemented into the actual trust, so it can then kind of integrate with the other systems that are used. So if that's part of the 10-year plan in what you're saying, then that needs to be done by 2026. It just shows how important it is, and that it is definitely going to be beneficial from a lot of different views.
That's right, absolutely. And I mean, it's very clear what it's doing. FDP, I'm just looking at that. I mean, one, it's enhancing preventive care and analytics. That's very much it. And of the 45 trusts that are using it, you'd recognise most of the names of the organisations. Real-time tracking of patient trends, that type of activity, and you need that vast amount of data. And that's where the power of these new technologies are coming, because you've got so much data and so many different data sets to analyze to get a good picture of what the patterns that are affecting patient activity. So that's it. It's focusing on some of the conditions that are focused on diabetes, cancer, mental health, substance misuse, that type of activity, all part of the new 10-year plan.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely an interesting topic, 100%. And I think obviously, you've mentioned a few times the 10-year plan. It's part of that. So it's kind of just the importance of what it's actually going to do and how it is going to benefit, trust as a whole, or more than it is already doing.
That's right. Yeah. And I think we'll be getting on with it. I mean, there are some challenges with it, as with all this thing. And a lot of the issues come around to the integration with the local systems. And you'd expect that, because the standardization of the data they're trying to merge together is where a lot of the activity has gone on. And Guy's and Tommy's was a good example of that with Epic recently. So you'd expect that, but that's business as usual, really.
I was going to say, I don't think there's any anything tech in the NHS is never straightforward, is it?
That's right.
There's always complications that do happen in an implementation.
But I think you can start to see some of the reasons why that's there. That's because of all of the fragmentation and all the multiple numbers of suppliers that were working with, if you like, with a limited architecture. Saying, if you're going to put in place a patient, an EDP, an APR patient, and you define the structure of that, you can implement that many different ways, as has happened in primary care with GP systems. The drugs system in EMIS and in System 1, they're all different. They're not interoperable, because that wasn't the definition of the architecture didn't allow that true interoperability when they specified compliance to the standards. And that's why we've got all this disparate problems. And it's also complex because there's different views on what is a patient, what is a record. The different clinicians will have different views on what the definition of some of these terms are. And that's gone on for years, resolving the data dictionary, if you like. But anyway.
I can imagine so. Well, all of that very interesting. Obviously, you've touched on the main points and everything like that. And I think obviously, we'll take that aside. That is a massive topic, and it's only going to keep getting bigger, which also massively links in and puts us across to AI. It's everywhere. It's a hot topic for everyone, and more organisations are embracing AI and tech into the day-to-day operations. It's part of everyone's everyday life, whether it'll probably be in work or even just at home. You working as the program lead with exposure to AI, how have you seen it implemented within programs to date?
There's an interesting one linkage in here, and that is, whilst we talk about FDP, you also briefly mentioned Snowflake.
Yeah.
Snowflake, Databricks, Microsoft Synapse are other engines that do a lot of work around analyzing complex, big data sets. And they are still valid to be deployed within organizations. There are some who've implemented Snowflake, for example, in Manchester, doing it particularly well. Others use Databricks. And they are adopting AI tools within those tools themselves.
Yeah.
So that's quite interesting to see how that's happening. So they're not all competing against each other. You've got FDP, you've got Synapse Data, all that stuff. That one thing maybe it's worth mentioning is that the reason these things are in place is that I know that one of the organizations that had implemented Snowflake was doing some population analysis. And in their conventional SQL environment, it was taking them something like 24 hours to process the data. They took the same data sets and implemented that using Snowflake, and it took them something like 14 minutes.
Oh, really?
The power transition, because they separate the use of the computing power from the data. And therefore, you suddenly, when you get some complicated stuff, you put more MIPS at it.
Yeah.
And then you take the MIPS off, which you can't do if it's on-prem, for example. So when you're doing that in the cloud, you can wind up the power for briefly, take it away. And that's how you start to get this stuff done. And they have more complex views of analyzing the data. Rather than having to analyze the data when you implement it into SQL, into your own databases, you do that at the time you need it.
Yeah.
So I won't go into all the techie details of that, but that's it. So that starts to affect all the issues around data storage and data warehousing, which is all part of this. And so people like Microsoft and Databricks and so forth have had to invest a lot of time training and transferring skills into the organization they're using. And that's one of the challenges that we've got today. So people like me, I suppose, I'm not going to go in there and say at the grassroots, I'm going to go and teach them how to use, say, Copilot, although up to a point I can, because I use it. But it's managing that deployment as a program of work into the organization. And that cuts across many organizations. It's a project, but it's also a program because of the different entities it's going to affect. So going on to AI, every 10 years in the IT industry, there's a buzzword. It's database, it's internet, it's cyber. All that stuff. Now it's AI. And the complicated thing in healthcare is sorting out the wheat from the chaff and what's good and what's bad. And the one way that's being addressed is to look at one, what's the evidence for its use? And secondly, what's the risk? So you can see if you've got a product that's perceived to be limited evidence on it and it's high risk, don't play with it.
Yeah.
If it's a lot of evidence and it's fairly low risk, implement it. A good example of that is radiology. Another good example of beginning to see that NICE in the UK has spent a long time working on some skin cancer product called Dermasensor, and that is now going to start to be deployed. So that's a couple of criteria that we have to look at before we suddenly rush in. And allied with that is that we need to make sure that the AI capabilities is designed into the tool, not as an add-on and a bolt-on. It's exactly the same we had to do with security. Cybersecurity and all those things, it has to be an integral part of the design of the product, not just as the bolt-on.
Yeah.
Now, so the areas in which you see this being deployed, AI, is in the clinical arena. And then you get into things like it's used in telemedicine, it's used in all different disciplines. Radiology is a good example. But we mustn't forget the back office. Yeah. Now, if you think about what Microsoft has done, they've gone out there and they've implemented Office 365. They've done a deal brilliantly, I think, because Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook is pretty core across the NHS as the platform on which we do all of our daily interaction, administrative tasks. They have bolted into that Copilot. Now, Copilot is a very powerful AI tool built by open source, which is the same company that built ChatGPT. And what that does, it means that what you find with the use of Copilot with these tools is prompts, which is the question you're going to ask it to solve for you. And the whole core strategy Microsoft is adopting, Copilot will be driving that strategy going forward. So rather than seeing it as an add-on tool, you're going to see it's part of your pal helping you do your job. Yeah. It's like, you and I are working together to achieve something. And that's the role that AI is going to take. If I'm trying to drive it and you're helping me, that's the tool that's coming in there. And it's very powerful. And that's being deployed more and more across the NHS. And there's some very good NHS examples. I think Oxford University Trust started using it back in January 24.
I was going to say one of the advanced trusts, aren't they, Oxford?
Yes, they are. And they've been deploying it and using it there. So there's things like that that I think are very powerful. And you most notice that recently Microsoft set up a new company for AI. And they recently appointed a healthcare Copilot business manager because they want to start getting this thing deployed actively across the NHS. And I think that's absolutely right. I don't know if you know the thing when you've been away, you come this, that, and the other, and you come back there and there's an email thread, n emails long. One simple prompt you can put into Copilot is summarize the email thread with bloggings. Bang, bang, bang. There it comes. You got the three things. Imagine it helping you write the notes from a meeting in Teams.
Yeah.
Things like that. You've got to document and write a paper. Or you want to summarize of a document you've read. I want the 3 key points on this NHS 10-year strategy, for example. Bang, there it is. Thank you. That's a very helpful start. And you can build on that. Those are the sorts of things it's starting to do. So where, for example, it's been implemented in Oxford, they've done a couple of good things. They used it to Teams to share. So if you and I have come up with something we've been doing, let's share that with the rest of the team, because they could build that prompt, be helpful. Yeah. It's there, it's available to do it. So improved collaboration and having Teams as an entity to share amongst those particular cohorts of people for that particular area is very, very powerful. That led them to set a centre of excellence for deployment of Copilot. And all these things help make it good and usable. Yeah. And hopefully it will improve the not invented here syndrome, where we start to share more and more of all these activities. Makes us all more productive.
No, of course. And everything that you're kind of saying, it did move on a little bit to what I was going to say. Obviously, it is only going to keep evolving. You've mentioned a couple of different things. It's obviously already part of pretty much a lot of people's everyday life. And you mentioned Copilot and how, like you said, if someone goes on holiday, it can then summarize that. I was kind of going to go on to where do you think it is taking us in digital healthcare, to the point that obviously there's a 10-year plan. I don't know whether that's necessarily just focused around data platforms, or where do you think it is going to be sitting in
the 10-year plan's got three key things. One is about prevention. Secondly is about exploitation of digital and digital transformation. And the third thing is addressing inequalities. And that comes back to the patterns of activities and all the different factors that affect the capabilities of what we can do to give the right solutions for the right patients in the right location. So I think it's there's a huge opportunity for people, I hope, like me, to help certain trusts in the way they start to deploy these things and act as a focal point, because it's not so much about the technology now, it's about the impact the technology is having on the organization. And that gets you back to the whole critical thing: it's the people, it's the process, and it's the technology. And the technology is the least thing to worry about.
Yeah.
The thing you have to concentrate on now, you have to be a bit of a diplomat, because there's been all sorts of power struggles in organizations as we've created ICSs, as you'd expect, and nothing different in healthcare. And therefore being aware of that and being able to resolve ambiguity, resolve contention that exists between different elements of organizations, because we're higher up in the organizational structures now. And the thing about the program management, it's less technically detailed, but it's much more politically focused and motivated about what the outcome of an event is going to be, what the right direction of travel is going to be. And that means you have to be able to do a lot of negotiating diplomatically within organizations.
Yeah,
and
I can imagine so.
Well, one tries to do that, if one can. So that's the direction of travel to me: resolve these contentious issues, communicate. I think inspire people at all levels and do this, and be able to work at the coalface. I'll show you how you can do a quick summary in Copilot of your email thread. Like me to show you? Bang, bang, bang. Oh, wow, I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was going to say, well, at the end of the day, kind of everything that gets, all the money that gets put into the NHS, the projects that happen, the likes of EPR systems, the infrastructure side, the likes of AI data platforms, it's all integrated and it's all implemented into NHS Trust for one thing, to make obviously things a lot faster, everything like that. And at the end of the day, the most important thing is to make the patients, to make everything go okay with the patients that do come in. And I do think when it comes to the likes of AI and data platforms, they are two massive, massive factors that are going to massively benefit the NHS in a way where times are going to go down. Like you've just mentioned, the likes of showing someone quickly how fast you're going to be able to summarise an email. If we didn't have something like AI which could just summarise that, it's then how long is it then going to take like that whoever's been off to then read that, then sort it all out, where you've just said within like a matter of seconds it's then summarised and then you can move on to the next thing. So
well, I mean, let's take it as an example. I mean, we said earlier about FTP. There's always issues and complexities in healthcare because it's very complex. I mean, the deployment activities, they center very much the concerns that people have about security, because the thing about Copilot and M365, all that stuff, it's about acting your own data.
Yeah.
So one of the things that Copilot does, it will inherit all of the security and safety features that you've already implemented in M365. One. Second area of issues, mine went to blank for a moment, but the return on investment.
Yeah.
The return on investment, one of the things that came out of the Oxford study, for example, about 10% of the organisation were getting 3 to 4 hours a week.
Yeah.
Now, most people were getting at least 1 to 2 hours. Now it's therefore you can use that back to do the job you're really wanting to do. And there's a huge frustration amongst the clinical staff and back office staff about the fragmentation of existing systems, which is leading to, we've got to address that much more strongly than we have. And hopefully that's going to be reinforced in the 10 plan. And the third thing is the adoption. Yeah. That is not simple because you're changing culture. And changing culture takes time to do that. So a bit of hand-holding around that area is something that we can try and do. So there's an alignment potentially here with the use of the move away from analog to digital transformation that centers around implementing things for data, using data platforms for improved population health, platforms, and beginning to exploit and use the AI to help you do your job more productively, more effectively.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, well, we've both mentioned a couple of the important things. So yeah, well, I just wanted to hop on a call today, just basically to go over them, the two massive points that are in the NHS. Obviously, big things that are happening within regards to pretty much now and the 10-year plan. So yeah, I do appreciate that, and thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.